Welcome back to Photoshop for Photographers. And today we're actually going to work inside of Photoshop. But first, the thing we need to do is just tackle this and adjust a few items inside of Adobe Camera Raw. Well, why? Because you should always adjust your image in Adobe Camera Raw if you have a RAW file before you ever get into Photoshop. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to come on over here to our color profile, and I am going to switch this to portrait. Well, why? Because it is a portrait. You can see how it flattened out our image and lowered the color vibrancy. Now, the first thing that we need to do before working on this is decide, is this image going to be worked on in color, black and white, or both? If it's in color, the first thing we're going to need to do is adjust some color. If it's black and white, all we really need to be worrying about now are values in the image. You can actually switch this over into black and white. You can see how it gets really dark, but we're just going to keep this in color for right now. The main issue in this photo is this face is very magenta. Magenta is the big problem color inside of Photoshop. If you get skin tones that are magenta, it is extremely difficult to color correct them and ever get them looking natural. The best thing to do is to shift that color to something else. In this case, we would go to sort of a reddish yellow and eliminate that magenta, because we can adjust and fix just about any color inside of Photoshop except for magenta. Now, if this is going to be a black and white image and we know it's going to be a black and white image, we don't have to worry about color and we can go straight into Photoshop after we make a few adjustments. So the first thing we need to decide is kind of what we want this to look like. And this is going to be different for every single type of person. How I tone it and how somebody else tones it is going to be completely different. So what I'm doing a lot of times in RAW is just kind of opening up my image, and I'm generally toning it, trying to get it in a little bit better space so I can adjust some details and aspects of the image. And then when I get into Photoshop, I can fix a lot of that stuff. So one of the first things I usually do is just kind of lower my contrast, and I'm going to open up the shadows because this is sort of a contrasty photo. And this will give me smoother tonal ranges, or going from white to black, than we had before, because I'm going to open that face up just a little bit. Don't really care so much about that. I could come in here and brighten this maybe just a hair, and that looks pretty good. Now, the next thing I can do is come over here to the adjustment brush if there's any place that I would want to adjust. So I'm making my brush smaller using that bracket key next to P. Remember, the adjustment brush settings are always going to be what you use last. So in this case, I want to fix this area of her face. I want to brighten that up just a little bit. So I'm going to actually click on shadows so I can brighten my shadows. That's going to put everything else as default, but I am going to bring up the exposure a lot, and I'm just going to try to hit that side of her face, not this side of her face. And that looks pretty good. I'm going to leave that color. I'm going to go back here. Now, the issue with that magenta, if I'm going to tone this image, I need to fix this color. And I'm going to do this here on these temperature sliders. So I can come up here and go to auto, and that's going to warm my photo up and actually give me a better spot. I'm just going to lower this maybe a little bit. Now I can also take this tint slider, because this is where that magenta is. And if I go over this way, we are making that more green. As you can see, that's really green. But we're making that more green. All we're trying to do is get rid of that magenta. I don't care what the color is, just as long as it's not magenta. So that looks pretty good. We're going to say we're okay now in this spot, and we're going to open this image up into Photoshop. Now you could spend more time working on this, but since this is going to be a Photoshop tutorial, I'm going to show you how to do a lot of this stuff inside of Photoshop. We're going to hit open image. It's converted that image. Now there's a couple important things that we need to pay attention to. So right up here is the file, and then we can see it's in RGB and 16-bit. Because when I was in Camera Raw, I told it to open up this image in 16-bit because that's going to give us the highest color depth in this image and the most data to work with. Now there's two different ways to tone inside of Adobe Photoshop. One is called destructive and one is called non-destructive. So what I'm going to do here is kind of slide my layers palette over and put that right there so we can see this. The destructive method goes like this. I'm just going to make a simple adjustment so you can see it. You're going to come up here and go to Image, Adjustments. All of your adjustments are located here. Now, most of these adjustments we are never going to use. You will also see usually the more important adjustments have a little symbol after them. And now I am on a Mac. So this is the Command L or the Command M. Those are the quick keys. So I can go to my board and hit Command M or Command L, and it will either bring up levels or curves instantly right away. Now, if you're on a PC, that's going to be Control L or Control M. Most of this stuff is going to be Control. You can see what is more important because most likely it is going to have a quick key after it. The stuff that doesn't have a quick key is stuff that most likely you're not going to be using as often. Going by Image, Adjustment, and then we are just going to go into Curves because I work into Curves. So here's our Curves box. And I'm going to make a quick adjustment, or I'm just going to brighten this up. And I'm going to hit OK. That has actually applied that adjustment directly to the photo. It has changed the image data on that image. That is what we call destructive. It's not ruining anything. It's just changing something. And destructive toning is not something bad. If you were a journalist or an editorial photographer, most likely you are going to have to tone destructively because that's the ethical way to tone in a lot of business institutions or editorial type jobs. I'm going to hit Command Z and undo that. The next way is by an adjustment layer. This is the non-destructive way. And what this means is we're going to do the exact same thing. So I'm going to come up here, and this is the curves. And the panel looks a little bit different, but it's basically the same thing. We get the curve. We're going to brighten that up a little bit. But in this case, it has made a new layer. And this layer is called an adjustment layer. What's cool about this is it's just a layer and it's just on top of the photo. I can turn this on and I can turn this off. This is called non-destructive toning. And what this means is it's never affecting your original image. It's just a layer on top of the image. If you flatten this or export it or save it, then it will eventually apply that to the image when you save it out. But at this point, it is just an adjustment layer. And at any point during the toning process, as long as you save it in the correct format, which is usually a TIFF or a PSD, you can come back in here and change this so you could make it darker or lighter or whatever you would want to do, or turn it on or turn it off. So that is non-destructive toning. In this set of tutorials, I'm going to be going over non-destructive toning. I could do both, and I have some tutorials on destructive toning, but basically the concepts of toning are the same. You're still going to be using curves in both sense. You're still going to be using hue saturation. You're still going to be using the same things. You're just going to be applying them different. And for simplicity and to keep this so it's easy to understand, we're going to tone in a non-destructive way. So there's a couple different ways to make an adjustment layer. Photoshop, almost everything in Photoshop has this. There's a whole bunch of different ways to do the exact same thing. I'm going to show you them. I'm going to tell you which one I use and why, and it's going to be up to you to pick what you want to do. The one that I do not use is right here. We're going to go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and then right here, you would pick what you want to do. So these are all the available adjustment layers. So once again, we'll go to Curves because that's what we just did. We'll hit Curves and it will bring up this new layer button, and I'll say, yes, I just don't want to call it anything. And then I can make that adjustment layer. We have two curves levels, both doing the exact same thing, but one, we went up here and went Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and then pick that. That's the slow way. I can say I never ever do that. Well, why? Because it takes too much time to go through those menus and do something like that. So I'm going to turn these two off. The next way is the way I showed you. So right here we have an adjustment. Now this adjustment is up here in the windows. So if you need to get access to adjustments, you want to make sure adjustments is selected. And then adjustments located right here. And these are your different adjustments that you have. And we have brightness, contrast, levels, curves, exposure, vibrance, hue saturation, color balance, black and white, photo filter, channel mixer, color lookup, invert, posterize, threshold, and gradient map. Those are all the available adjustments right here, and it's quick and easy. All you have to do is click on one, make your adjustment, and then it will be applied. The last method is in your layers palette. Now remember, layers, come up here, you would make sure layers is checked, and then we have layers. You are definitely always going to need layers because this is the kind of the key to working non-destructively. Down here, we have a bunch of icons. This is trash. This is new layer, new group. This is to select that adjustment layer. This is for a mask, and this is for layer style. But what we want is this thing that looks like a moon that's half white, half black. We're going to click on that, and then we'll come up, and we can see once again we have curves, and then we get that little adjustment. Now that adjustment is always showing up into properties, and it will automatically pop up and become active even if you don't have it selected in the windows right here, properties. And you can make this bigger or smaller. So if you need a bigger window to kind of see the curve, you can easily make these bigger or smaller. I actually usually have my properties over here. So I've made my adjustment here, and then my layer adjustment is over here. So notice each one of these are basically doing the same thing. This first one, these were all created differently. So we created one by going up into layer, new adjustment layer, curves. That was way number one. The second was to simply click here on this adjustment layer. And number three was to come down here into the layers and select it this way. All three do the exact same thing. They don't usually work like this. So I'm going to adjust this real quick here so I can kind of show you how I work. All right. So normally I would leave these windows open like this because these are the main things that I'm going to be working on. I would have adjustments, properties, and layers. And usually I would have them all different. Now, if this is taking up too much room, what I can do is bring layers over to here, add layers. I'm going to close this window, and now I've got more of a view of my image, and I've got my adjustments, and they don't need a lot of room. So we can drag this up higher, and then I've got my layers. It doesn't leave a lot of room for all this stuff here, but these are the main items that we need. And if you're using a small MacBook Pro or laptop, you're not going to have lots of room. Now, normally when I'm working, I don't have all this stuff on this screen. This is over here on a second screen, and I have my palettes all over there. So I want to go back to my original image before I did all this stuff. I have a couple of different things that I can do. I can come over here and select all these items and then go ahead and click this delete button, and it will get rid of everything. Or I can go back in time here, or I can come up to this image and go to File, Revert, and that's going to take it back to its original state. Now, Revert will not be available if you've saved your image at some point. Revert is only available if you have not saved your image. Now we're back kind of to the start, and we're going to kind of decide what we want to do. To simplify everything, we're going to actually convert this to black and white. So we're going to remove color so it's not an issue in this image. When you are toning, if you tone something perfectly in color, it does not translate into a perfectly toned black and white. Usually black and white values need to be brightened, especially in the highlights and midtones. Don't expect to tone something perfectly in color and then convert it to black and white and it look good. It does not happen like this. So what we're going to do is today we're going to take a look at our first adjustment layer, which is going to be a black and white adjustment. And so I'm going to come over here, and this is my little adjustment button, and right here is black and white. I'm going to go ahead and select that. and that is going to bring up the properties, and it's going to have all these different colors. And you can see right here, it has my black and white adjustment layer. Now there's a little white box here. In a little bit, I will explain to you what that means. The first thing we want to do here is take a look at these sliders. These sliders let us adjust the black and white image per color. So anything that was red, now this has to do with even skin colors. There's red in the skin color, even though we don't see it as red. As I slide that over, it's gonna adjust the image, either darker or lighter. Anything that has yellow, I can make darker or lighter. Anything that is green, now we have a lot of foliage and grass, is going to be adjusted. Anything with cyan, you can see there's not a lot of cyan except for in her eyes. A little bit of blue and magenta. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to adjust these to when I think it looks good. There's also an auto button that I can click here and it will auto tone it. I do not like auto. Auto most likely all the time does not make things look better. So I'm going to come up here to custom. Now we also have some presets. If I wanted the green filter or any of these things or neutral density, I can select those and they'll go to sort of that default. Well, I'm just going to go back up to default how it was originally. And I'm just going to slide these until I think it looks good. Most of the time, I'm just going to brighten my yellow values here. Maybe not really touch the greens too much. Open my blues up a little bit. And that looks pretty good. Now, a lot of you might be thinking, boy, it's still really dark. Yes, it's dark. But I'm just trying to even out the values. We're going to go in and then do a curves adjustment layer next. Now, right here, we have what's called a mask. So this white box down here is a mask. This is the most important aspect of working in adjustment layers. This layer mask hides or shows your adjustment. So our adjustment is to make this black and white. It was color, and that adjustment made it black and white. If the adjustment mask is white, it is going to apply that adjustment to the whole image because the whole mask is white. If the mask is black, it is not being applied to the image at all. So you can see it's back to its original state. The adjustment is active, it's still there, but the mask, the black mask, is basically hiding this adjustment from this image. So it's not being applied at this moment. Now, if I come in here and I take my brush, so I've got a brush, I'm going to make everything at 100% here and see how this works. Let me get a normal brush. So I've got this normal brush and I'm going to come over here and I've got my default colors. Your default colors, if you hit the letter D, give you the default colors. I want the color white. Why? Because this is black. Anywhere I want to make this image black and white, all I have to do is paint the color white. So that white is revealing that black and white layer. Anywhere it's black, it's hiding that from happening. So the way you apply an adjustment to the image is by either using white, all black to hide it, or a combination of white and black to only have it appear in certain areas. So in this case, if I just wanted her to be in black and white, I could just come in here with this white colored brush and paint her body white, and it's applying it to her, but not to the background. Or I could invert that and make it black and white on the back. So where white is showing is applying the black and white adjustment. Where it's black, it's making it color. Now, I didn't do a good selection or brush this in good, so we're seeing a little bleed over. Worry about that at this point. But in this case, I want to make this whole image black and white. I don't want just a specific area. In that case, we've made this all white. And we're ready for the next step in the process of toning inside of Adobe Photoshop. That's going to be the last step today here in Photoshop. So what I'd like you to do is go ahead, grab yourself an image. A raw image would be great. Go into Adobe Camera Raw. Practice making some simple adjustments. Then send it on over to Adobe Photoshop. When you get into Adobe Photoshop, kind of practice bringing up the different adjustment layers, and then make yourself a black and white adjustment layer. And you can do it here in the adjustments. You can do it here so it's black and white, or you can go all the way up to layer, new adjustment layer, black and white. Either one of those ways, then kind of play around. So if you click on this little symbol again, it will bring this up. You can play around with these little sliders and get the image looking how you want. Hopefully this has been helpful. If you have any comments or questions, you can leave those below. And as always, don't forget to subscribe.